The air grew colder with each step Father Elias took, the stone beneath his boots slick with dampness and age. The faint light of the cathedral above faded until it was swallowed entirely by the darkness of the crypt. In his hand, the lantern's flame flickered precariously, casting uncertain shadows that danced along the narrow spiral staircase. The scent of earth and decay clung to the air, mingling with the faint trace of burning wax that seemed to pulse from the depths below. As he reached the bottom, the heavy silence of the crypt enveloped him, broken only by the distant drip of water echoing through the vaulted chambers. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, faded frescoes of saints and sinners alike, their faces worn and hollowed by centuries of neglect. In the center of the chamber, resting atop a stone pedestal, was the source of the eternal flame, the cursed candle that had refused to die for centuries. Its eerie glow was unlike any ordinary fire. It flickered with unnatural blue and red hues, twisting and contorting into shapes that resembled anguish faces frozen in silent screams. Elias swallowed hard, feeling a tremor of unease ripple through his body. His fingers tightened around the lantern's handle, knuckles whitening. He had come here to end this nightmare, to snuff out the cursed flame and bring peace to the Forsaken Cathedral. Yet, standing before it now, the weight of the flame's malevolence pressed upon him like a physical force. A sudden chill swept through the crypt as ghostly whispers swirled around him, voices from beyond the veil threading through the stale air. They were faint at first, unintelligible murmurs that clawed at the edges of his sanity. Elias closed his eyes briefly, whispering a prayer to steady his shaking heart. "By the grace of God, grant me strength," he murmured. Opening his eyes, he took a cautious step forward. The candle's flame flickered violently, morphing into a grotesque visage, a twisted mask of agony and despair. Elias's breath caught in his throat as the faces of trapped souls seemed to press against an unseen barrier, their spectral forms reaching out as if begging for release. Memories of his lost friend surged unbidden, the ache of grief and doubt gnawing at his resolve. He had come as a skeptic, but now confronted with the tangible horror of the eternal flame, his faith wavered perilously. Yet retreat was not an option. He was compelled by something deeper, a need to understand, to confront the darkness that had ensnared so many souls. Drawing from the folds of his robe, Elias produced a small crucifix, its silver surface dulled by time. He held it aloft, voice steady despite the tremor beneath, chanting ancient prayers taught to him long ago. The crypt filled with the sound of his incantation, a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. The candle flared angrily, shadows leaping from the flame like tendrils of smoke infused with malevolence. The air crackled with energy as a spectral force surged toward Elias, intent on crushing his spirit. The priest staggered but refused to yield, his voice rising in fervor. Visions assaulted his mind, images of failed resurrection rites, of Father Gregory's desperate attempts to cheat death, and of the souls bound to the flame's cursed existence. The cathedral's crypt became a battleground between light and shadow, faith and despair. In the heart of this spiritual tempest, Elias felt his own fears and doubts laid bare. Yet, amid the chaos, a resolve crystallized. He would not let this cursed fire continue to feast on the innocent. But at what cost? As the flame hissed and roared, Elias prepared for the ultimate confrontation, knowing that the fate of the cathedral and his own soul hung in the balance. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint crackle of the dying flame. Elias's breath came in ragged gasps as he lowered the crucifix, sweat mingling with tears on his weary face. The ancient evil was not yet vanquished, but the battle had been joined. Somewhere deep within the shadows, the eternal flame pulsed still, waiting. The air in the crypt was thick, heavy with the weight of centuries, as Father Elias bent over the faded parchment sprawled across the cold stone altar. The faint flicker of a single candle cast long, wavering shadows, weaving a tapestry of light and darkness that danced across the damp walls. Sister Miriam stood silently behind him, her wrinkled hands folded in quiet prayer, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and a cautious hope. Elias's fingers trembled as he traced the ancient script, the words revealing the grim truth he had been dreading. The eternal flame was not merely a stubborn candle. It was a prison forged by a failed resurrection ritual centuries ago, a ritual that had bound countless restless souls to this forsaken place. The flame fed on death, yes, but it also held captive those who had been ensnared by the curse. Father, Miriam's voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 prayers. If you put out the flame, those souls will be freed, but at what cost? Elias swallowed hard, the knot in his throat tightening. He had come here to extinguish what he believed was a superstition, a relic of a faith twisted by fear and desperation. Yet now, confronted with the reality of the souls trapped within the flickering light, his certainty wavered. Jonathan Crane's footsteps echoed softly as he entered the crypt, camera in hand. "Whatever you decide, we're recording it," he said, his voice steady but edged with tension. "This isn't just a story anymore. It's a reckoning." Elias nodded, though his eyes remained locked on the candle. The flame pulsed rhythmically, shifting from a deep blue to a fiery red, and for a fleeting moment, Elias could swear he saw faces twisted, anguished, pleading. He reached out, fingers hovering just above the wick. The cold air pressed against his skin, and a chorus of silent screams rose in his mind, filling the crypt with unbearable sorrow. "This flame," Elias murmured, voice cracking, "holds the souls caught between life and death. To snuff it out is to release them, but what if they are lost to darkness once freed? What if the curse is only broken by sacrifice?" Sister Miriam stepped forward, placing a weathered hand on his shoulder. "Faith is not the absence of doubt, Elias. It is the courage to face the unknown." Jonathan adjusted his camera, capturing every flicker of emotion on Elias's face. The priest's gaze hardened, resolve settling amidst the turmoil. He could no longer deny the terrible choice before him: preserve the eternal flame and its haunted legacy, or risk destroying it and the souls within with unknown consequences. The silence deepened, broken only by the subtle crackle of the candle's flame. Elias closed his eyes, drawing a shaky breath, and prepared to make his decision. Moments stretched into eternity as the flame danced before him, a symbol of cursed faith and the price of unnatural resurrection. In the stillness of the crypt, beneath the weight of history and hope, Elias reached out once more, this time with grim resolve. The candle flickered violently under his breath, as if resisting the inevitable. A sudden gust of wind snuffed the flame, plunging the crypt into darkness. For a heartbeat, nothing stirred. Then, a whispering wind swept through the chamber, soft, mournful, and filled with the echoes of countless souls finally set free. Elias opened his eyes. The candle was dark, but the air vibrated with a strange, fragile stillness. He had chosen sacrifice over preservation, faith over fear. Yet as the first tendrils of dawn filtered through the stained glass, a lingering chill warned that the curse's end was only a beginning. The eternal fire may have been extinguished, but its shadow remained, haunting the cathedral and the hearts of those who dared to confront it. Elias knew his journey was far from over. The crypt whispered secrets still, and the price of resurrection had yet to be fully paid. The choice was made, but the consequences were yet to unfold. And in the silence, the candle refused to die. Father Elias moved carefully down the narrow, crumbling stone steps that led into the cathedral's crypt. The air grew colder with every step, thick with the musty scent of damp earth and ancient decay. His lantern cast long, trembling shadows on the walls, but it was the flickering light ahead that drew his gaze, the eternal flame, still burning with that unnatural, eerie glow of blue and red. It pulsed like a heartbeat in the darkness, casting ghostly shapes that seemed to writhe and twist in the corners of his vision. He paused at the foot of the stairs, gripping his crucifix tightly, the worn silver cool against his palm. The silence around him was oppressive, broken only by the faint, unsettling crackle of the flame's dancing light. It was unlike any fire he had ever seen alive, sentient, feeding on something beyond mere fuel. The faces within the flame's glow flickered for a moment, revealing anguished visages of souls trapped in eternal torment, their silent screams reaching out to Elias's very spirit. Memories surged unbidden his lost friend's frail face, the whispered prayers in the night, the long nights spent questioning his faith. The flame seemed to feed on his doubt, growing brighter, more threatening. Yet beneath the fear, a steely resolve took root. He had come too far to falter now. "By the grace of God," he whispered, stepping forward, "I will end this." His voice echoed through the crypt, swallowed by the cavernous space. The flame flickered violently as if sensing his challenge. Shapes emerged, twisted forms of those who had fallen to the curse, their eyes hollow, their mouths opening in silent wails. The heat of the fire was no longer merely physical. It burned at his very soul, igniting fears and regrets he had buried deep. Elias raised the crucifix, murmuring prayers in Latin, ancient rites he had hesitated to invoke until now. The words felt foreign on his tongue, but carried a desperate power. The flame recoiled, hissing like a beast wounded but not defeated. Shadows leapt from the walls, swirling around him in a tempest of despair and rage. As the struggle intensified, Elias felt the weight of his own failings pressing down a past marked by loss, his wavering belief flickering like a candle against a storm. The flame whispered promises of resurrection, of defying death itself, but at a terrible cost. Summoning all his faith and will, Elias stepped closer, pressing the crucifix toward the heart of the flame. The crypt shook with a sound like thunder, the cursed fire flaring in a blinding explosion of light and shadow. Then, silence. When his eyes adjusted, the flame was gone. In its place lay a faint glow beneath the ashes, smoldering embers that seemed to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat not quite stilled. Elias sank to his knees, breathless, his soul forever marked by the battle he had endured. The cathedral above was still, but the weight of the eternal curse lingered, a whisper in the dark corners of the ruined sanctuary. Elias knew the fight was not truly over. The flame might be extinguished, but its shadow endured. Rising slowly, he took one last look at the crypt's depths. "Let this be the end," he murmured, though a part of him feared it never would be. His journey of faith, doubt, and torment had reached a turning point, one that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Outside, dawn broke pale and cold over the cathedral. The eternal flame had been challenged, its fate decided in the crucible of darkness. But somewhere deep within the stones, a quiet pulse remained. The candle that refused to die flickered still, a silent testament to cursed faith and the price of resurrection. Elias stepped out of the crypt, the weight of the past and the uncertain future heavy on his shoulders. As the first light of morning touched the cathedral's shattered stained glass, he knew his life and his soul had been forever changed. The air in the cathedral's crypt was thick with a silence that pressed heavily against Father Elias's chest, as if the very stones around him were holding their breath. The flickering candle, perched on a cold stone altar, burned with an unnatural dance of blue and red flames, casting grotesque shadows that writhed and twisted like living things upon the ancient walls. Elias's gaunt face was pale, eyes sharp but tired, etched with the weight of countless, sleepless nights, and the burden of the impossible choice before him. He stepped closer, the worn soles of his shoes echoing faintly on the flagstones. The flame seemed to pulse in response, its eerie light flickering against the hollows of his sharp cheekbones. Around him, the air was charged with whispered voices, soft, mournful, and accusing echoes of souls bound to this cursed place, trapped in a liminal dance between life and death, fire and ash. Sister Miriam stood nearby, her frail frame silhouetted against the dying light filtering down from the cathedral's fractured stained glass. Her habit, tattered and faded, hung loosely around her small shoulders, but her hands were steady as she reached out to clasp Elias's in a gesture of both comfort and shared resolve. Her eyes, soft and luminous even in the dimness, reflected a flicker of hope mingled with the deep fear she carried for the consequences of what was to come. "This is the only way," she whispered, voice trembling but resolute. "The flame feeds on death and despair. To snuff it, you must offer yourself your faith, your very soul as the final ember." Jonathan Crane, ever the skeptic but now visibly shaken, stood a few paces behind, clutching his camera. His rugged face was pale under the ghostly light, eyes wide as he recorded the moment that would define all they had endured. "Are you sure there's no other way?" he asked, voice low and urgent. Elias met his gaze, a flicker of pain crossing his sharp eyes. "There is no other way, Jonathan. This fire is a curse born of twisted faith and unnatural resurrection. It must die, or it will consume this place, and all who linger here forever." With a steadying breath, Elias extended his hand toward the flame. The moment his skin touched the fire, an intense heat roared through him, sharp and biting, as if the flame sought to burn not just flesh but spirit. Sparks flew like angry spirits released from their bonds, illuminating the crypt in a fleeting blaze of terrifying beauty. Pain seared through his veins, but he held firm, clutching the candle's base as the fire writhed and screamed in colors no human eye should witness. Around them, the cathedral seemed to shudder, the ancient stones groaning beneath the weight of unspoken curses. The flickering flame surged violently one last time, casting ghostly faces and twisted visages into the shadows before collapsing into smoldering ash that crumbled silently to the floor. Elias staggered back, breath ragged, skin blistered but soul unbroken. The oppressive presence that had filled the crypt for centuries seemed to dissipate, replaced by a heavy, almost tangible silence. Yet, as he looked to Sister Miriam and Jonathan, his eyes betrayed a lingering unease and unshakable sense that while the candle's light had died, the darkness it fed upon had not vanished entirely. "It is over," Sister Miriam murmured, though her voice lacked the certainty she so desperately wished to convey. Jonathan lowered his camera, his usual skepticism replaced by a quiet awe. "For now," he said softly. Elias sank to his knees, the weight of his sacrifice settling deep within. His faith, once steadfast and unyielding, was shattered and transformed in the crucible of the eternal flame. Where once he had believed in clear absolutes, now only shadows and embers remained fragile, uncertain, but perhaps, just perhaps, a beginning. Outside, the cathedral's vast, shattered windows caught the faint glow of dawn. Light began to creep through the cracked glass, touching the ruin with a pale warmth. Somewhere deep within, beneath the ash and silence, a faint pulse flickered, a whisper of the flame that refused to die. And Father Elias, forever changed, rose slowly to face a new dawn, his soul marked by the fire he had conquered and the shadows he would carry always with him. But the eternal flame story was not yet finished. It lingered in the breath of the wind, the echo of whispered prayers, and the restless silence of the cathedral's heart waiting for the day it might rise again. The battle was won, yes, but the war, that was another matter entirely. As Elias stepped from the crypt, his footsteps echoed in the hollow chamber. The candle was no more, yet the shadows seemed to breathe, aware, watching. The curse was not dead, it was merely sleeping, and the flame refused to die. The early morning light struggled to penetrate the fractured stained glass windows of the ancient cathedral, casting fractured patterns of pale color onto the cold stone floor. Father Elias sat on the worn steps near the great entrance, his back resting against the cracked pillar as he stared toward the altar. The space where the eternal candle once burned was now empty, a hollow void where the unnatural flame had finally been extinguished. The silence hung heavy around them, not the peaceful quiet of rest, but an oppressive stillness that seemed to pulse with something unseen, something unresolved. Jonathan Crane settled beside him, exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders and the dark circles beneath his eyes. Despite his usual bravado and sharp skepticism, the events they had witnessed left an indelible mark on him. He pulled out his camera and switched on the screen, scrolling through footage that captured moments of terror, confusion, and the inexplicable. Yet even the recordings failed to fully capture the weight of what had transpired within these walls. "It's gone," Jonathan murmured, nodding toward the empty altar. "No flame, no fire. But I don't think this is over." Elias sighed, rubbing his hands over his worn clerical robes. "I hoped it would be," he admitted. "But this silence, it feels like the calm before something else. The curse, if it's a curse at all, is not a thing you simply snuff out. It lingers in the shadows, in the memories, in the souls trapped here." He rose slowly, his joints stiff from hours spent in restless vigilance. Walking cautiously through the cathedral, Elias' footsteps echoed hollowly across the ruined nave. Broken pews lay scattered like forgotten relics of a forgotten faith, their surfaces thick with dust and debris. The air was cold unnaturally so, and carried a faint whisper that seemed to drift, just beyond hearing, a susurrus of lost prayers and mournful sighs. Elias paused beneath a collapsed archway, his sharp eyes scanning the dim corners where shadows clung stubbornly. He could almost feel the eyes of the restless dead upon him, the weight of centuries pressing down with a suffocating inevitability. The victory of extinguishing the flame felt hollow. The price had been steep, and the consequences still veiled in uncertainty. Jonathan moved to Elias's side, lowering his camera as a chill ran down his spine. "Did you see that?" he whispered. "Something shadow shifting, not just the wind." Elias nodded grimly. "The darkness has not fully receded. This place is steeped in ancient pain." The eternal flame was born from desperation, from a faith twisted by fear of death. They retreated to a small alcove near the rear of the cathedral, where Elias pulled a battered journal from his satchel. The leather cover was cracked and worn, a testament to the countless nights it had absorbed his thoughts and fears. Lighting a small lantern, he began to write, his pen moving slowly, deliberately. "Today," he began, "I witnessed the extinguishing of an unnatural fire, but I am not certain the end has come. The candle burned with the souls of the lost, bound by a curse wrought from man's refusal to accept death's finality. In silencing its flame, we may have silenced only its voice." The weight of his words settled between them like a tangible thing. Jonathan watched him, the young journalist's usual skepticism, replaced by a profound respect tinged with fear. "So what now?" he asked softly. "Do we leave? Do we warn others?" Elias looked up, eyes shadowed but resolute. "We carry the memory. We bear witness. And we pray that what we have done will be enough to protect others from this place. But I fear the eternal flame's curse is not so easily banished." Outside, the wind stirred the broken branches of the surrounding trees, their skeletal forms silhouetted against the pale dawn. Somewhere deep within the cathedral, a faint pulse of light flickered, not the roaring flame that had once burned defiantly, but a subtle, unearthly glow that seemed to breathe quietly in the darkness. The candle that refused to die had been silenced, but its story was far from over. Elias closed his journal with a soft sigh, the tremble in his hand betraying the turmoil within. He rose, the burden of faith and doubt heavy upon his shoulders. "We leave this place changed," he said quietly, not defeated but marked. Jonathan nodded, gathering his equipment. "And we tell the world." As they stepped out into the chill morning air, the cathedral loomed behind them, a monument to faith, fear, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. The curse lingered still, a silent ember waiting beneath the ashes, a reminder that some fires refused to die. The road ahead was uncertain, but Father Elias knew one thing with unwavering clarity: the price of resurrection was steep, and the boundary between hope and despair was thinner than he had ever imagined. And somewhere deep in the shadows, the eternal flame pulsed faintly, waiting.